America, with its partners, just dropped the hammer on narco-terrorists with the first confirmed land strikes inside of Ecuador taking place just on March 6th, a few days ago. From this video being produced, SOUTHCOM under Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and General Francis Donovan backed Ecuadorian forces in lethal kinetic operations against these designated terrorist groups, moving way beyond what we've seen before with these boat hits in international waters. This is straight up American resolve in action, teamed up with its partners, showing that we're done playing defense against cartels poisoning the streets of the US and other nations with fentanyl and terrorizing the countries of where these cartels are. Over 150 narrative deaths have come from maritime strikes already. And now we're taking the fight ashore. So stick around, because at the very end, we'll talk about how this could explode into a wider conflict as these cartels are being pinched harder than ever before. And then check out this breaking news. President Trump just encouraged Latin American leaders to use military action to help the US fight against cartels, basically telling them to take the gloves off and take it right to the faces of the cartels. Next, Trump forms a new coalition to destroy the sinister cartels and terrorist network. Trump administration just announced America's counter-cartel coalition, and it's an entire conference taking place with Central and Southern American leaders, and we're going to do a full breakdown on what they're doing and what they just did and how important of a move this is. And let's pop to X right now and go to SOUTHCOM and see exactly how this operation went down. So this is U.S. Southern Command site here on X, and check this out behind the scenes. Massive operations going on against the cartels. This is a U.S. Air Force HH-60 Jolly Green II assigned to the 33rd Expeditionary Rescue Squadron. It's flying over the Caribbean near Puerto Rico. So the heat is on still in the Caribbean. And then check this out. At the order of the Secretary of War, Commanding General Francis L. Donovan directed the joint force to support Ecuadorian forces conducting lethal kinetic operations against designated terrorist organizations within Ecuador on March 6th. So let's have a look at this. We'll see the actual operation going down. You can see Ecuadorian special forces likely on the side there. U.S. advisors, Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, basically advising these different special operators in Ecuador to do exactly what you're seeing right now. Strike down a narco lab, strike down narco headquarters. And again, this is the strike that we're seeing. And you can see there's special operators in position to actually watch the strike take place. This is showing you the level of the gloves being taken off against the actual cartels in Central and South America. That entire narco lab right there vaporized, and special operators on the ground ready to get any squirters. Squirters are, any targets or high value targets that try to leave the compound during a strike. And then SSE, sensitive site exploitation right there, having an operator on the ground, filming it afterwards to see exactly what was going on, what exactly the grubby little hands of the cartel were doing right there. And then it continues. This has all been going on behind the scenes, guys. And then this message from U.S. Southern Command on March 6th, the U.S. military in the Caribbean remains at a high state of readiness. Service members of Joint Task Force Southern Spear stand ready to take decisive action against narco-terrorist operations in the region with a CV-22 Osprey right there. Special operators being loaded onto that thing, going in to do work. And then very interesting here, some partnerships with U.S. generals and the Ecuadorian leadership as well, basically taking the glove off. So let's have a listen to Secretary of War Pete Hegseth as they attend the counter-cartel conference. We get used to kind of living inside a status quo, or we get used to a new normal sometimes. I think that's happened to a lot of these countries. It happens inside our countries. Well, these gangs are just too powerful, or the drugs are just everywhere. And our job is to change that paradigm. President Trump's trying to do that in our own country and then help other countries in this AO recognize that no, with the right political will and the right authorities and some new partnerships and some new capabilities, we're taking the fight to these guys. Never once, if we're active other places, is our gaze turned away from SOUTHCOM and NORTHCOM and Western Hemisphere, which is the president's priority. So, as you can see, this is a massive narco war happening right now, and the Secretary of War saying that the U.S. won't be distracted by places like Iran to continue to take the fight to the cartels as the Iran conflict is going on. And this is a Secretary of War commenting this. He said, "Today I joined leaders from across the Western Hemisphere at the America's Counter Cartel Conference. Together, we reaffirmed our shared commitment to counter narco-terrorist networks and strengthen defensive cooperation across the hemisphere." So as you note there, Counter Cartel Conference, it's the America's Counter Cartel Conference. So really focus on bringing in partnerships with Central and South America, because again, when you do strikes in other countries, it can get a little bit dicey if that other country isn't involved as well. So Operation Southern Spear that kicked off back in September of 2025 under the Trump administration, zeroing in on maritime interdictions. First hitting drug boats hard and then racking up over 150 strikes on narcotists themselves. These cartels have been redesignated as full-on terrorist organizations because they're fueling violence, corruption, and direct threats to U.S. national security. But the big escalation here hit on March 6th when kind of quietly, a lot going on in the world right now with Iran. But SOUTHCOM on March 6th supported Ecuadorian troops in land-based lethal operations against groups inside of Ecuador. This was a joint operation with the U.S. providing intel, logistics, and even direct support, maybe even having Predator drones up ahead, helping with the strike itself, but letting the Ecuadorians themselves pull the trigger. And direct support on these raids are focused on taking out drug shipment facilities, as we see this facility get completely crushed. These are the first publicly acknowledged U.S. land strikes against narco-terrorists in the entire region. So when it comes to striking them on land, the gloves are off, and we'll likely see these strikes increase every single day. Details on casualties and the exact spots right now haven't been released, but SOUTHCOM has called this a decisive engagement against entrenched networks that are deep inside the Ecuadorian jungle. But these narco-terrorists, they're not just smugglers. They're extremely well-funded. I mean, they basically look like a paramilitary force. If you see some of the footage of them lined up, at first you're like, oh, this must be a Central American or a Mexican Special Operations Unit. No, it's just the cartels. They're armed, organized, and using everything from narco submarines to encrypted apps to move massive cocaine.
Narco traffickers, drug cartels engage in campaigns of terror, violence, and corruption to enrich themselves and expand their insidious influence. They are poisoning and killing all of our nation's citizens. These sophisticated networks flood our streets with fentanyl, cocaine, and other drugs that kill at a higher rate than any conventional war. This is the single gravest threat to security in our region and across our hemisphere. Narco traffickers, drug cartels engage in campaigns of terror, violence, and corruption to enrich themselves and expand their insidious influence. They are poisoning and killing all of our nation's citizens. These sophisticated networks flood our streets with fentanyl, cocaine, and other drugs that kill at a higher rate than any conventional war. This is the single gravest threat to security in our region and across our hemisphere. Narco traffickers, drug cartels engage in campaigns of terror, violence, and corruption to enrich themselves.
Cocaine loads through ports and airstrips. In Ecuador, they've turned neighborhoods into battlegrounds with violence and corruption, hitting citizens hard across the entire hemisphere. Recent moves include ramping up land-based operations after months of sea dominance. But now the cartels are facing heat because they've been redesignated as a terrorist status organization. So it's kind of like to the host nations, the Trump administration is like, yeah, if you guys don't take care of it, we can actually go in and take care of it ourselves. So this will be much better if you guys are at the point of the spear and the US is just backing you up. But there's deep local ties that these cartels have. They've got massive amounts of cash from the drugs they are shipping to America. And their adaptability is huge. They've got tech like FPV drones for you acronym lovers. Those first are in view drones. The weaknesses here are, though, they are no match for the US intel apparatus. US intel apparatus uses everything from space assets right down to human intelligence, and it gives the US and the partners of the US, in this case Ecuador, the edge to execute these precision strikes. Where these narco-terrorists really never saw it coming, and once we lock on and start doing this, their hideouts and subs do not become safe havens anymore, and these narco thugs are going to get very desperate. So hitting the cartels on dry land right in Ecuador that backs up allies' raids. So continuously putting pressure, as we saw in those videos, there's special operators out and around the compound. So they're boots on the ground, primarily Ecuadorian forces, likely with US advisors. And this is something that US Special Operations does extremely well, especially when they're teamed up with air assets. So the Ecuadorian air assets likely taking the lead, as we saw with that helicopter that they're using, but even potential here for the MQ-9 to be up overhead, pumping extremely valuable information to any of the special operators that are going to be going in, because cartels obviously think very strategically and they want to put booby traps. They want to trap American forces, create a big black eye for Ecuadorian and US forces that are now allied to raid their actual compounds. And their whole goal is to hit the shipment spots, dismantle the whole pipeline that's feeding and poisoning the rest of the world. It's wild how fast this has shifted from ocean patrols to now boots on the ground from these Ecuadorian forces and support from US advisors. Cartels are now labeled at a level that is similar to ISIS. So the gloves are completely off. This isn't some limited operation anymore. This is sending a clear message that the hemisphere's cartel bad boys are now running out of safe spots real quick. So what does that mean? It means desperation, but the US edge comes from killer tech and tight coordination in Ecuador and the region. The US is rolling in with signals intelligence. Signals intelligence is used to snag radio communications, cell phones, and it uses satellites and other assets to track the exact movements of the cartels. Literally, they're sitting there right now listening to a cartel boss complain to his girlfriend about his wife. She's just so needy. Doesn't she know right now we're all on the run and I can't do the honeydew list? And then cyber intelligence as well, or SIGINT for you acronym junkies. That is injecting malware into cartel devices and messing up their encrypted chats. Plus AI boosted open source intelligence for predictive mapping on cartel turf of what their next move could be. And then drones are there to handle constant surveillance. Counter drone jamming is what the cartel is going to attempt. But the US can use that as well in conjunction with Ecuador and other nations to shut down the cartel's first-in drones. Also biometric screening at borders, trying to catch any of these terrorists that are trying to leave their country and escape to other nations. And enhancing detection of those sneaky narco subs likely will come from systems like Lockheed Martin's Lamprey. That is an underwater sea leech that is specifically designed to sneak into tight spots in different bays where these narco subs might be operating. And if the cartel members are trying to escape via fast boats or even narco subs or even transit some of their drugs in an act of desperation, thinking that they can hide in these semi-Burmese or fully submersible narco subs. Now with this counter cartel, America's conference, likely there's a lot of conversations happening right now on the actual technology that can be used to take down the cartel. So the lamp rate is perfect for that. You could have it latch on to fast boats, latch on to special operators that are in the region with different boats that are going through these different river deltas and striking down these exact cartel targets like what we saw in Ecuador. So if you have a few of these lampreys just hanging out, waiting, doing observation, popping to the surface, and then releasing drones for surveillance or even strikes, you're really giving the partner nations of the US and the US cartel hunting apparatus an extreme advantage. So that lamprey, while it can be used in bigger conflicts like in Iran, it's also extremely good, in my opinion, for precise hits that can track every single move of these narco-terrorists. and then Ecuador stepping up as a key ally, it looks like, and their joint playbook showcases American tech dominance combined with their own indigenous experience of their country, knowing the country like the back of their hand. There's really not a lot that can compete with that. If you know exactly where you need to go, you know exactly where some of these routes are, and you've been watching them for years, and then you combine that with American tech dominance and American weaponry like the Lamprey, now all bets are off for the cartel. So Ecuadorian and U.S. forces are delivering the precision and power at this point that no one else can match against these cartels. So let's move to the strategic analysis section, which I love to call 4D chess. This is classic maneuvering and pressure on the cartels, designating them openly as terrorist organizations. It opened the door for U.S. military muscle without any apology added on, building on partnerships like what we've seen in Ecuador to set precedents, maybe even in Venezuela down the line. These strikes will be happening teamed up with the government if they're not happening already. But the U.S. is dismantling the logistics backbone of the cartels while deterring other cartels through sheer resolve, tech superiority, and public affairs. Releasing videos like this likely makes some of the cartel members think, yeah, maybe I should go legit. Maybe it's time to retire and put some of my money into avocado farming. Might be a good call at this point. So picture this. This successful Ecuadorian model, all this different coordination could inspire bolder moves. We're talking more land operations rolling out in other partner nations where cartels have strongholds like what we've seen in Mexico, with one of their top cartel bosses being rooted out from the CJNG. But there's many more cartels like Sinaloa cartel. So you could see Mexico actually start to partner more with the US for these strikes as well, since intelligence from the US intel apparatus was used to nab Elno in Mexico. Ecuador is proving a rock-solid ally at this point, and likely more strikes on the way from them. This could reshape the whole fight against the cartels. What do you guys think? Do you think we see these strikes ramp up for these land strikes that we were told would be coming soon? Now they're here. So what do you think? Will we see these ramp up, or will we see the Counter Cartels Conference not create a decisive strike long-term against the cartels? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Go and follow me on Instagram. Click the link in the description. Join the Maxa Ready Room if you want to see me do a live every single Maxa Afterburner week, pretty much every day at this point, actually. And then watch this next video that pops up right here. This is Ryan, also known as Maxa.Furterburner, signing.